The first time Han Jia saw Seo Jin-woo, he was standing in the sun by the literature room, flipping through a poetry book as if he belonged there, as if he had not just transferred to a school where no one knew his story, where no one knew hers. The irony, of course, was that their stories were already tangled, long before they knew each other's names. But on that day, all Jia saw was a new student with warm eyes, soft hair, and a crooked smile when he noticed her staring. He raised the book in greeting. She blinked and turned away, face flushing. That should have been the end. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Han Jia didn't have time for boys. Not when she worked weekends at a local convenience store. Not when she counted every cent of her lunch money. Not when her mother cried silently at the kitchen table every first of the month, pressing old receipts like they were still worth something. Responsibility was all Jia knew. Smiles were rationed. Dreams were postponed. But literature class was her sanctuary. The 1 hour of her day where words made more sense than bills, and stories gave her somewhere else to be. So when the new student was assigned the empty seat beside her, she didn't say a word. She didn't even look up when he pulled out his notebook. But he looked at her, and after class, he followed her out the door. Han Jia, right? She turned, startled. He smiled. I'm Seo Jin-woo. His voice was gentle, not pushy, just curious. She gave a tight nod. Hi. Do you want to study together sometime? She narrowed her eyes. Why? He tilted his head. Because I don't understand half of what this teacher is saying. She blinked. He added quickly, and also because I think you might. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. Fine, she said, but only during lunch. I don't have time after school. Deal, he grinned. I'll bring the snacks. Over the next few weeks, Jin-woo kept his promise. He brought convenience store sandwiches and melon milk. She brought her notes and her guarded silence. But it cracked slowly. He made her laugh, not big, not loudly, but enough that she started looking forward to lunch. He asked about her favorite books and didn't flinch when she admitted she reread The Little Prince every year. He never pressed too hard, never asked about her father, or the hushed whispers some students passed between them when they thought she wasn't listening. One afternoon, while walking back to class, he said casually, "You're different." She frowned. How? You carry yourself like someone twice your age. She looked away. I've had to. He didn't ask more. But that day, when she opened her locker, there was a small folded paper inside. A quote, "The strongest hearts are the ones that keep beating quietly." No name, but she knew it was him. They began dating in secret. Not because they had to, but because something about their bond felt too fragile, too private to be shared. He held her hand behind the literature shelves. She rested her head on his shoulder when they studied. He never once made her feel like she had to pretend. And in return, she started to let him in inch by inch. She told him about her part-time job, about her mother's health, about how her father used to be proud until everything fell apart, about the betrayal that crushed their family and left them in debt they would never escape. He listened, not with pity, with presence. "Sometimes I wish I could rewrite our lives," she whispered once. "You already are," he said, "every time you wake up and choose to keep going." She didn't know how to respond, so she kissed him, and he kissed her back like she was a story he had waited his whole life to read. But secrets, no matter how carefully buried, always find their way to the surface. One Monday morning, Jia was called to the school office. Just a simple message. Help review the seating chart for the upcoming joint literature seminar. She agreed. It was nothing unusual. She was a top student, after all, and teachers often relied on her for organization. She walked in with her planner, eyes scanning the papers on the table. And then she saw it, a registration form. Student, Seo Jin-woo. Father, Seo Gwang-hoon. Occupation, Former CEO, HN Holdings. Her fingers froze. Her breath hitched. Her mind began to spin. Seo Gwang-hoon, the name her mother couldn't say without crying. The name stamped across every court document from years ago. The man who had crushed her father's company in a corporate betrayal so swift and merciless it left him with nothing. Nothing. And now his son, had been sitting beside her, kissing her, laughing with her, touching the pieces of her life he had no right to even look at. She didn't go to class that day. She walked out of the office, down the hallway, and kept walking until she reached the school gates. Jin-woo texted, called. She didn't answer. The next day, he found her at the edge of the school rooftop. "Jia," he said, breathless. "You disappeared." "You should have told me," she interrupted. He froze. "What?" She turned to face him. "You should have told me who you were." He paled. "I was going to. I didn't want you to judge me before you knew me." "I knew you," she said, "and now I know the truth." He stepped forward. "Please, I'm not my father." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "But you carry the name that destroyed my home." His face fell. "Ja." She shook her head. "I can't do this. I won't. Goodbye, Jin-woo." And she walked away, leaving him standing in the wind, holding nothing but silence. The days after the breakup passed like slow-burning hours. Han Jia moved through school like a ghost. She no longer sat in the literature room. She no longer stayed for lunch. She didn't look at her phone. She worked longer shifts, avoided hallways where she might run into him. And when her mother asked if something had happened, Jia just smiled and said, "I'm fine." But she wasn't, because every time she turned a page in her book, she saw his name. Every time she walked past the poetry section, she remembered his laugh. Every part of her routine had been rewritten by his presence. Now, she was trying to erase him, but the ink wouldn't fade. Seo Jin-woo didn't try to stop her, not with words. She had made her choice, and he had to respect it. But the silence she left behind crushed him more than he expected. He had been careful, too careful. He never lied, but he hid the truth out of fear, out of shame, out of knowing exactly what his father's name meant in her world. Still, he hadn't expected her to walk away so completely. Until she did. He stopped smiling in class, stopped volunteering to read aloud, stopped eating with anyone at all. When someone asked if he was okay, he said yes. When a teacher called on him, he nodded, but everyone could see it. The shine in him had dulled, and no one knew why. No one, except the girl who had once called him her sanctuary, and now wouldn't meet his eyes. One afternoon, Jia passed by the teacher's lounge and overheard her literature teacher speaking with the principal. "She's pulling away," the teacher said. "Her grades are still strong, but something's changed. She used to find joy here. Now she just survives." The principal sighed. "She's been through enough. I wouldn't push her. She deserves more than survival." Jia walked away before they could see her. That night, she went home and pulled out the folder she had hidden beneath her bed. Inside were the old documents, court records, debt notices, newspaper clippings. At the center of it all, Seo Gwang-hoon's name. Her father had trusted that man, had considered him a mentor, until the merger that never happened, until the funds disappeared, until the lawsuits crushed their family business. She remembered the day her father packed a single suitcase and left, unable to face them. He hadn't been heard from since. And now his son had been sitting beside her, kissing her, promising her things. She pressed her fingers to her eyes and tried to breathe. The next morning, something changed. Miho, a student from the journalism club, stood at the entrance of the school handing out printed copies of the school newsletter. On the front page, "When Guilt Isn't Yours to Carry," by Seo Jin-woo. Jia froze. She took one copy and began reading. "I used to believe I had to hide my name to be accepted, because my name comes with weight, with headlines, with wounds I didn't cause, but still feel responsible for. My father made choices that broke lives, and some of those lives crossed paths with mine. She looked at me like I was the man who destroyed her home, and maybe in some ways I am, not because I acted, but because I carry a shadow. But I'm learning that guilt cannot be inherited. What we do with that guilt, that's ours. So I'm writing this not for forgiveness, but for understanding. I am not the past. I am what is left of it, trying to build something better. She couldn't breathe, not out of pain, but out of something deeper, recognition. She found him in the library after class. He sat at the far corner table, alone, earbuds in, staring at a blank page in his notebook. She walked up, hesitated, then sat down across from him. He looked up, eyes wide, breath caught. She took a deep breath, then said quietly, "You didn't have to write that." "I did," he said. "Not for you. For me." She nodded. "I read it." He lowered his gaze. "I didn't expect you to forgive me." "I'm not sure I can," she admitted. His shoulders tensed. "But," she added, "I also can't keep punishing someone who's trying to be more than a name." He looked up, and she said the words that had been stuck inside her chest for days. "You are not the past. You are what is left for me to move forward with." Tears pooled in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. So she reached across the table, took his hand, and in that quiet library corner, between poetry shelves and dust-speckled windows, they sat with all the broken things between them, but they sat together. That weekend, they walked to the Han River. No destination, just stepped side by side. She told him about her father, the silence he left behind. He told her about the shame, the distance, the long shadows. They didn't pretend to fix anything. They just listened. And as the sun dipped below the water, Jin-woo turned to her. "I'm not perfect. I'm not asking for perfect," she said. "I'm asking for honest." He nodded, then whispered, "Can I hold your hand again?" She offered it before he finished the sentence. At school, people whispered when they saw them together again, but Jia didn't care. When Sobai rolled her eyes and muttered, "Guess you forgave the enemy," Jia simply replied, "He's not the enemy. He's the proof that people can grow." No one said anything after that. Their relationship wasn't easy. There were still moments of silence, still wounds that stung, still questions neither had answers to. But there was trust now, and laughter, and the kind of love that comes from surviving something too heavy to carry alone. On the last day of the semester, Jia placed a folded note in Jin-woo's locker. Inside, "I thought you were the ending of my story, but you turned out to be the chapter that made me want to keep reading." Winter settled softly over Seoul, and with it came a quieter season at school, the kind where the hallways echoed more than they buzzed, and students clung tighter to warmth, to routines, to each other. For Han Jia and Seo Jin-woo, things had changed, not in dramatic ways, but in slow, meaningful shifts, the kind that rebuilt what had once been broken. They no longer hid, no longer whispered. They walked through the courtyard side by side, hands almost touching. He waited for her outside the convenience store when her shift ended. She studied with him again in the library, only now she let herself smile without apology. Trust had returned, but with a deeper shape. It wasn't naive anymore. It was earned. Still, there were days when memory crept in, when her mother's tired face at the end of a long night reminded Jia that healing didn't erase the past. One evening, after a late shift, Jia came home to find her mother asleep on the couch. On the table was an envelope. Inside, another medical bill, larger than the others. Her chest tightened. She folded it back up, placed it under her own textbooks, and didn't mention it. The weight was too familiar by now. The next day at school, she moved a little slower, spoke a little less. Jin-woo noticed. Of course he did. They were sitting beneath the old pine tree near the rear courtyard, where she used to read alone before he transferred. Now it had become their spot. "You're thinking too hard," he said gently, nudging her foot with his. She blinked out her thoughts. "What?" "You have that look again. The one where you disappear behind your own eyes." She hesitated, then said, "Just tired." He nodded, didn't press. But later that night, he left something in her locker, a single paper flower folded out of notebook paper. Inside, a quote in her handwriting, one she'd written in her journal weeks ago. "Even strong people get tired. Let me hold you when you do." She clutched it in her hand for a long time before folding it again, carefully, and placing it in her bag. Jin-woo's relationship with his father remained strained. He lived with his mother now, saw his father only on weekends, and even then rarely spoke. There were no apologies from a man who had caused so much, only silence, distance. But for Jin-woo, the choice was clear. He wouldn't follow the path his father carved in greed. He would carve his own, with gentleness, with honesty, with Jia. And that resolve was enough. Most days, the literature teacher announced a new essay competition, letters to the past. "Write to someone," she said. "Anyone. Someone who hurt you, someone you lost, someone who shaped you." Jia's pen hovered over a blank page for almost 10 minutes. Then she began. "Dear Father, you left more than an empty seat at the table. You left silence, confusion, and bills I still pay with my time. I've spent years wondering why. What broke you? What you feared more, losing the business or facing us with empty hands? But something changed. I met someone who reminded me that the past isn't a chain unless I let it be. He has your enemy's name. And somehow he's the kindest person I know. Through him, I stopped blaming the future for what the past stole. I still don't forgive you. Not fully. But I don't hate you anymore. And maybe that's the start of healing. Love, Ja." She didn't expect to win. She didn't even plan to submit it. But Jin-woo found the printed copy on her desk and read it quietly. When he finished, he looked at her. "I don't deserve this much grace," he whispered. "You're not the one who needs to be forgiven," she said. "You just reminded me I could." He leaned in, forehead resting gently against hers. "You saved me, Jia." She didn't say anything, just closed her eyes and let herself believe it. The essay was posted on the school's website. It made its way through classrooms. Teachers printed it. Students passed it around. Whispers turned into silence, then respect. And when the principal called her in to congratulate her, she simply said, "Thank you." No smile, no pride, just peace. Later that week, Jin-woo showed up at her shift with a scarf in his hands. "It's getting cold," he said, "and you never wear anything warm." She blinked at him, then laughed softly. "You're lecturing me about self-care now?" He grinned. "Only because I care." She took the scarf, wrapped it slowly around her neck, then looked up. "I used to think my life was a story written by other people." "And now," he asked, "now I think I get to write the ending." That winter, the first snow fell quietly during midterms. Students gathered at the windows, watching in awe. Jia and Jin-woo stood near the back of the literature room, watching flakes spiral like secrets outside. He turned to her. "Do you regret any of it?" She shook her head. "Even the hard parts brought me to this chapter." He reached for her hand. "This time," he said, "let's write it together." Spring arrived like a breath held too long, sudden, soft, and almost hard to believe. Cherry blossoms bloomed across the campus courtyard. Uniform sleeves rolled back. Sunlight poured through the windows of the literature room again. And with it came the seas of applications, recommendations, and impossible decisions. Jia sat at her desk, surrounded by scholarship forms. Medicine, journalism, literature. She wanted all of it, but she could barely afford any of it. Her mother had quietly suggested a gap year. Save money first, then apply next year. "There's no shame in it," she'd said, smiling with tired eyes. Jia nodded, but deep inside it still hurt. She'd done everything right. Studied harder, worked longer, smiled less, and still, the future felt just out of reach. Meanwhile, Jin-woo had been offered something she didn't expect. A scholarship, full ride to a university abroad, music and philosophy. He hadn't told her yet, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he didn't know how. What would it mean to leave now? To fly away from the girl who taught him to stay? They sat under the cherry blossom tree one afternoon, watching petals drift like snow. Jia was quiet. He watched her. "You're somewhere else again," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're running just to stay in place?" He nodded. "Every day. But now, I have someone to stop running for." She turned to him, and he smiled gently. "You." She looked down at her hands. He hesitated, then said, "There's something I need to tell you." Her eyes flicked up. "I got accepted into a program abroad. They offered a scholarship." She didn't move, didn't blink. He kept going, carefully. "I haven't said yes yet. I didn't want to decide until I talked to you." She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, "You should go." His chest tightened. "Ja, you should go," she repeated. "You earned it. But what about us?" She gave a sad smile. "If we're real, we'll survive the distance." He reached for her hand. "I don't want to survive you. I want to live this with you." Tears pricked her eyes. "I want that too," she whispered. "But maybe, for now, we have to be apart to stay ourselves." He didn't argue. He just pulled her into a hug and held her there, like he could pause time with enough silence. The day he left, she stood at the airport gate, scarf wrapped tight around her neck, the one he gave her. Neither of them said goodbye. They just looked at each other, and he whispered, "You are the best chapter in my life." Then he kissed her, slow and sure. She didn't cry until the doors closed behind him. Back at school, Jia threw herself into work. She applied for every grant she could find, took on extra shifts, wrote essays late into the night. She didn't wait for his texts, but they came anyway. Photos of rainy streets, snippets of poetry from European books, recordings of songs he said reminded him of her. And every time her heart answered, "I miss you too." One day, her literature teacher pulled her aside. "There's a new scholarship opportunity," she said. "A publishing house is offering one to a student who submits an original essay collection." Jia's hands tightened around her books. "You have something to say," the teacher added softly. "And it's time people listen." She titled the collection, "Letters I Never Sent." Each one was addressed to someone she once blamed, to her father, to her past, to the version of herself that only knew pain. She included one final letter. "To the boy who carried the name that broke me. I thought your last name was a warning, a wound, a weight, but it turned out to be a beginning. You taught me that healing is not forgetting. It's choosing to move forward anyway. You were never what I lost. You were the reason I stopped losing. And whether we share the same sky or just the same words, know that you changed me in ways I will never forget. Love, Jia." Weeks passed. One afternoon, she opened her email and gasped. "Congratulations. You've been awarded the Horizon Scholarship. Full tuition covered. Publication contract pending." She sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then she smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because something was finally possible. She didn't tell Jin-woo immediately. She wanted to wait, to see him again in person, to say it face to face. And then, without warning, he showed up at the school gates in late spring, back from his semester abroad. Hair longer, eyes softer. She spotted him from the library window and raced down the stairs. They met in the middle of the courtyard, breathless. "You're here," she whispered. "I couldn't stay away." She laughed, eyes shining. "I have something to tell you." "Me too," he said. "You first," she smiled. He looked nervous, then said, "I'm transferring back." I realized something while I was gone. She blinked. What? My place isn't in another country. It's beside the person who helped me find myself. Her heart stuttered. She reached into her bag, pulled out the acceptance letter, and handed it to him. He read it and looked up. You did it, he whispered. She nodded, eyes filling. I wanted to tell you face to face. He folded the letter slowly, then held her face in both hands and kissed her right there in the courtyard where everything began, where the story that once broke them finally wrote its ending. Together. By summer, the cherry blossoms were long gone, replaced by the heavy hum of cicadas and warm breezes slipping through open windows. And yet, Han Jia felt more alive than she ever had in spring. Not because life had suddenly become easy, but because, for the first time, it was hers. Fully, the day she stepped into the Seoul Literature House to sign her scholarship contract. She wore her school uniform for the last time. Beside her was Jin-woo, dressed simply, his hand brushing against hers the entire train ride. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. She would begin university in the fall. Her collection, Letters I Never Sent, would be published under her name, the same name that once made her feel like a victim of someone else's story. And Jin-woo had enrolled in philosophy and creative arts program in Seoul, choosing to stay rather than chase some idea of success far from everything that had healed him. They weren't running anymore. After the meeting, they walked through the Bukshin Hanok village. Tourists buzzed around them, snapping photos and laughing in languages they didn't recognize. But Jia barely noticed. She was watching the sky. Jin-woo finally spoke. My father called me last week. She turned. He said, he read your essay collection. Her heart stopped. He recognized himself? Jin-woo nodded. Of course. How could he not? She braced herself. And what did he say? He said he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he was glad someone still found a future after him. Jia stood still, the summer breeze catching her hair. She wasn't sure what to say. Jin-woo gently added, You didn't forgive him, but you didn't let him own you either. That's more powerful. She reached for his hand and held it tightly. I don't think I ever will forgive him. You don't have to, Jin-woo said. Forgiveness is never owed. But peace, that's something you deserve. Later that day, they found themselves in a tiny corner cafe near Insadong, the kind with handwritten menus and creaky wooden floors. She sipped iced tea while Jin-woo scribbled lyrics in a small leather notebook. You still write like your fingers are running out of time, she teased. He looked up and smirked. And you still edit everything in your head before speaking. Habit. He tore out the page he was working on and slid it across the table. I wrote something for you. She blinked. You don't have to sing it, he said. Just read it when you're ready. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her bag. That night, alone in her room, Jia unfolded the paper under her desk lamp. You were the chapter one didn't expect. The sentence that broke the pattern. The name that changed the story. And now, if you'll let me, I want to write every page after this with you. She smiled, then cried, just a little, because this time her tears were not made of pain. They were made of possibility. Weeks turned into the quiet, hopeful rhythm of early adulthood. College orientations, first lectures, commuting through crowded subways. She often wrote in notebooks between classes, poems, phrases, moments she didn't want to lose. Jin-woo still teased her for refusing to use a laptop. But you write with more weight when it's in ink, he said once. She smirked. Exactly. They met at the Han River on weekends, sitting beneath the same tree where so many of their early conversations had happened. Sometimes they talked about the past, sometimes about the future, but mostly they just existed in the now, unafraid, unhidden. One day, as she sat beside him watching the water, she asked, Do you ever wish none of it had happened? The past, he asked. She nodded. My family's bankruptcy. Your father. The way we met." He thought for a moment, then said, "If none of it happened, I wouldn't know how to love someone the way I love you." She blinked at him. He smiled. "You showed me that love isn't about pretending we're unbroken. It's about choosing each other, even with cracks." She leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes drifting shut. "I'm glad I chose you," she whispered. "I'm glad you chose yourself first," he replied. Months later, on the day her book was published, they stood together in a small bookstore where her launch event was being held. Friends, teachers, even a few strangers gathered in the back. Jia stood in front of them, heart pounding. This was it. She opened her notebook, her real one, the same one she'd used since she was 16, and read aloud from the final page. "This story began with a name that broke my world. It ends with one that rebuilt it. Mine." She closed the notebook. The room applauded. But the only person she looked at was Jin-woo, standing quietly near the back, eyes full of pride and something more. She walked straight to him, and in the middle of the crowd, without hesitation, they kissed. No more secrets. No more shadows. Only two people who refused to let their past define their ending.